Everyone avoided her. She carried royal blood, yet her table was always empty. Whispers followed her like shadows, and her long ears were treated as a flaw instead of a crown. Until one night, in the most crowded hall of the galaxy, a human pulled out the one chair no one dared to take and sat beside her. Because sometimes destiny doesn't change with a war, it changes when someone simply chooses to sit next to you. The palace hummed before it shone. It always hummed first. A low vibration ran through the translucent floors, up the curved pillars, along the silver-veined walls that caught the light of the twin suns and bent it into ribbons. Anyone else might have called it beautiful. She called it predictable. The hum meant the day had begun its long performance, and she would once again play the role written for her before she had learned how to read. She stood on the eastern balcony where the suns were still low, their light pale and undecided. The wind lifted the dark fabric at her shoulders and brushed along the length of her ears, long and elegant, curving slightly backward from her head. They were warm with blood, sensitive to every shift in air pressure, every whisper behind her back, an evolutionary gift she had come to resent. It was difficult to ignore rumors when one could practically hear them forming. "Your Highness," said a voice behind her, round and smooth as polished metal, "I regret to inform you that you are once again the subject of statistical improbability." She did not turn. "Raloon, if this is about the suitor projections, I am not interested." A small orb drifted into her peripheral vision, its surface shimmering with faint constellations. Raloon adjusted its glow to a polite morning blue. "On the contrary, the projections have improved. Your likelihood of receiving a sincere marriage proposal has increased from 3% to 3.2. She allowed herself a slow blink. How generous of the universe. "I recalculated after removing candidates who faint at direct eye contact," Raloon added helpfully. That, despite herself, drew a quiet breath of laughter from her. It was soft and quickly swallowed by the wind. She folded her hands before her, fingers steady, posture impeccable. Royal blood did not excuse slouching. Royal blood did not excuse disappointment either. Below the balcony, the capital spread outward in layered terraces of crystal architecture and suspended gardens. Anti-gravity pylons held entire walkways aloft like strands of glass woven through the air. Ships moved in silent arcs between towers, their hulls catching the light of the suns and flashing like distant fish beneath water. It was a civilization older than many stars and far more stubborn. She had been born into its center, and somehow grown up on its edge. "Today's schedule," Raloon continued, projecting faint glyphs into the air, "includes the final preparations for the Grand Convergence. Delegates from 12 systems have confirmed attendance. 3 have declined due to unexpected stellar turbulence, which I believe is diplomatic code for we are afraid of saying the wrong thing near you." "Raloon." "Yes, Your Highness." "Do try to sound less delighted." The orb dimmed theatrically. "Apologies, I shall adopt a tone of dignified melancholy." She turned then, meeting the orb's soft glow with steady eyes. They were not the luminous gold of her mother's line, nor the sharp silver of her father's. They were an ordinary shade, deep and thoughtful, too human in their warmth, some had whispered, as though resemblance to humanity were a flaw. Her ears twitched faintly at the memory. "You disapprove of the convergence," Raloon observed. "I disapprove of theater disguised as diplomacy," she replied. "Everyone pretending not to notice what they notice. That your table is often the least populated." She gave it a look. Raloon brightened defensively. Purely observational data. It was not anger she felt. Anger required energy. What settled in her chest instead was a familiar, measured weight. Suitors had once lined the reception halls when she was younger, drawn by title, by lineage, by the prestige of standing near her family crest. They had bowed too deeply, spoken too quickly, smiled too widely. And then, after a conversation or two, after realizing she did not giggle at rehearsed compliments or nod obediently at dull ambition, they had drifted away. Some claimed she was cold. Some claimed she was intimidating. One particularly dramatic noble had declared that her ears were too expressive, as though cartilage were a political weapon. She touched one absently now, tracing the subtle ridge along its outer curve. They were longer than most of her people's, a rare throwback trait from an older genetic line, highly attuned to frequency shifts, capable of detecting variations in tone that others missed. She heard truth too easily. She heard insincerity before it finished forming. It was difficult to be charmed when one could hear a lie inhale. Perhaps, Raloon ventured, you might attempt smiling more during the convergence. I do smile. You expose your teeth in a manner statistically associated with restrained tolerance. That is smiling. For predators, perhaps. She inhaled slowly, counting the rise and fall of her breath. The palace hum shifted as energy conduits rerouted power to the lower halls. Preparations were underway. Fabrics woven from light itself would be unfurled. Gravity fields would be calibrated for visiting species with denser skeletal structures. Translation matrices would synchronize to avoid accidental declarations of war over misinterpreted idioms. All of it so civilized, all of it so fragile. Do you ever calculate the probability, she asked quietly, that something unexpected might happen? Raloon flickered. Define unexpected. Something not predicted by tradition. The orb paused for a fraction longer than usual. Tradition resists unpredictability. I know. A faint smile tugged at her mouth, which is precisely why it deserves to be challenged. Raloon rotated slowly, as though studying her from multiple angles. Shall I interpret that as rebellion? Interpret it as curiosity. They stood together in the morning light, queen and machine, bound by protocol and something resembling companionship. Raloon had been assigned to her at birth, an adaptive intelligence designed to advise, to monitor, to protect. Over time, it had developed a personality dangerously close to opinionated. Your isolation, Raloon said more gently, is not universally endorsed. She arched a brow. No. There are factions who consider you the most stable candidate for future leadership. And yet they do not sit beside me. Stability is admired from a distance. Of course it is. A transport vessel roared faintly in the distance, descending toward the western docks. Delegates were arriving early. The convergence would begin at dusk, when the twin suns dipped low and the sky deepened into violet. The symbolism was ancient, unity at the meeting of lights. She wondered which light she was meant to represent. Would you prefer, Raloon offered suddenly, that I fabricate a minor scandal to divert attention? Perhaps a rumor that you are secretly assembling a fleet of sentient teacups. She stared at it. The teacups would be very polite, the orb insisted. Extremely intimidating in formation. A soft, involuntary laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It echoed faintly off the balcony's curved walls. For a moment, the weight in her chest loosened. You are impossible, she said. I am optimized. Footsteps approached from the corridor behind them, measured, cautious. Her ears caught the shift in fabric, the faint tremor of hesitation. She did not need to turn to know who it was. Her cousin paused at the threshold. You should prepare, he said, voice carefully neutral. The delegates from the Kareth system have expressed curiosity. About me, she asked lightly. About our customs. Raloon dimmed its glow to an unimpressed shade. She inclined her head. Then we shall satisfy their curiosity. Her cousin hesitated. You do not have to endure this alone. The statement hovered awkwardly between them. He meant well. He always had. But good intentions were not the same as presence. I am not alone, she replied calmly, glancing at the orb. Raloon brightened with pride. Statistically accurate. Her cousin exhaled, unsure whether to smile. Very well, dusk then. When he left, the silence returned, but it felt different now. Charged, anticipatory. She looked once more at the city below, at the ships threading through sky lanes, at the people moving in careful choreography. Somewhere among the arriving vessels were species who had never seen her before, who did not yet carry inherited opinions about her posture, her silence, her ears. The thought stirred something unfamiliar. Possibility. Raloon, she said softly. Yes, Your Highness. Adjust my attire for the convergence. The orb projected fabric simulations around her form, flowing silver, deep indigo, threads of starlight woven into structured lines. She dismissed several with a flick of her fingers. Something simpler, she decided. Let them see me, not spectacle. Raloon recalibrated. A design formed elegant, restrained, emphasizing the natural curve of her shoulders, the proud line of her neck, the delicate sweep of her ears adorned only with fine silver filaments. She studied the projection. "Yes," she said at last. "Bold choice," Raloon commented. "Radical minimalism. The court will be scandalized. Let them be." The suns had risen fully now, casting the balcony in steady gold. The hum of the palace deepened as energy stabilized for the long evening ahead. She rested her hands against the cool railing and allowed herself one private admission. Perhaps tonight would be identical to every convergence before it. Perhaps she would sit at a long table while conversations bloomed elsewhere. Perhaps whispers would coil and dissipate like smoke. But perhaps, just perhaps, someone would choose differently. Raloon's voice softened. "Your heart rate has increased." "Excitement," she said evenly. "An unusual metric." She smiled, not the restrained baring of teeth it so often accused her of, but something quieter, warmer, almost amused. "Then update your projections," she murmured. Below them, another vessel pierced the atmosphere, its hull reflecting both suns at once. By the time dusk folded itself over the capital, the palace no longer hummed. It resonated. Energy lines pulsed beneath the floors in slow waves, responding to the gravitational preferences of a dozen visiting species. The grand hall had expanded, literally. Walls had shifted outward, molecular seams parting to accommodate additional seating tiers and atmospheric regulators. A faint shimmer hung in the air where translation fields synchronized, ensuring that no diplomatic incident would begin with an incorrectly conjugated verb. She stood at the threshold before the doors opened, hands resting lightly at her sides. The silver filaments woven through her attire caught the low violet light and reflected it in quiet lines. Her ears were adorned simply, no crown, no excessive ornamentation, only the natural elegance of their length and curve. They tilted slightly forward now, alert, catching the layered murmur of hundreds of voices beyond the sealed doors. Her heart beat steadily. "Final opportunity to feign illness," Raloon whispered through her private channel. The orb hovered invisibly above the archway, cloaked to avoid distracting more fragile dignitaries. "I can simulate a mild atmospheric allergy, very convincing." "I will survive," she replied. "Confidence level, higher than your suitor projections." Raloon made a faint, offended sound. Statistical mockery from royalty. "I shall log this moment." The doors parted. Light spilled inward, not harsh, but layered. The twin suns had dipped low enough that their glow filtered through the crystalline ceiling, fracturing into streams of gold and violet. Floating chandeliers adjusted their luminescence in response to each arriving figure, ensuring no one appeared either too dim or too radiant. Diplomacy, after all, was partly about lighting. Conversations ebbed slightly as she entered. Not silence, never complete silence, but a subtle shift, like a current redirecting itself around a stone. She walked forward with measured grace, neither too slow nor hurried. Each step registered against the adaptive floor, which adjusted its density to match her stride. She had always disliked that feature. It made the world feel too eager to accommodate her while its people hesitated. Delegates inclined their heads as she passed. Some smiled carefully. Others studied their own hands with great interest. A tall envoy from the Kareth system attempted a bow and miscalculated the local gravity, dipping far lower than intended before correcting with mechanical dignity. She offered a polite nod, pretending not to notice. Her assigned table stood near the center, not at the exact heart of the hall, but close enough to signal significance. It was long, curved slightly to encourage conversation. Its surface shimmered with embedded star maps that shifted slowly beneath transparent crystal. The chairs around it were empty. Of course they were. Raloon dimmed sympathetically. "Would you prefer I project holographic companions? I can generate 3 agreeable ambassadors and 1 mildly argumentative scholar for balance." "I will manage," she murmured. She took her seat. Across the hall, laughter rose from a cluster of dignitaries already deep in animated exchange. A species composed partly of bioluminescent tendrils pulsed bright green in amusement. Nearby, A trio of crystalline beings communicated through harmonic resonance, their tones vibrating pleasantly through the air. No one approached her table. Her ears caught fragments of whispered dialogue carried on subtle currents. Too reserved, intimidating lineage, doesn't entertain trivialities. She kept her gaze steady, resting her fingertips lightly on the table's edge. The star map beneath her hands shifted to display a familiar constellation, her family's ancestral system. The irony was not lost on her. A server drone glided silently to her side, presenting a selection of atmospheric-compatible refreshments. She selected one without looking closely. It shimmered faintly in her glass. "Your pulse remains controlled," Raloon noted. "I am not fragile. I did not imply fragility. You implied monitoring. That is my function." She lifted the glass and took a measured sip. The liquid tasted faintly of solar citrus and something sharper beneath. It grounded her. To her left, a portly merchant from a trade consortium attempted to discreetly move his chair farther from her table while maintaining conversation with someone behind him. He pressed the wrong control panel. His seat disengaged from localized gravity and rose slowly into the air, rotating with dignified horror. "I assure you," he declared loudly, floating upward, "this is customary on my world." A ripple of suppressed laughter traveled through the hall. Even she felt the corner of her mouth lift. "Would you like me to assist?" Raloon asked. "Let him descend with whatever pride remains." Moments later, a staff technician discreetly recalibrated the chair, returning the merchant to solid ground. He avoided looking in her direction entirely. The evening continued. Delegates arrived in waves, filling nearby tables while leaving hers conspicuously spacious. Conversations swelled and softened, politics woven through pleasantries. She listened without appearing to, her ears catching tonal shifts that betrayed hidden agendas. Trade routes masked as cultural exchanges. Alliances disguised as shared research initiatives. It was exhausting, hearing truth hum beneath every word. Then the hall's entrance flared briefly with a new arrival. She felt it before she saw him, a change in the rhythm of the room. Not a dramatic shift, but an irregularity, a different cadence of footsteps, less rehearsed. A human. There were only a handful present this cycle. Their species was still considered young in interstellar terms, though stubbornly ambitious. Humans walked as though gravity were a suggestion rather than a rule. He paused just inside the hall, gaze sweeping the expanse with open curiosity rather than calculation. His attire was formal by his standards, structured, dark, understated, but lacked the ornate signaling common among older civilizations. He looked neither overwhelmed nor excessively impressed. Raloon pulsed faintly. Human delegate identified. Records indicate minimal prior engagement with our court. "Is he aware of protocol?" she asked quietly. His briefing file includes 72 pages on etiquette. Probability of complete compliance, 40%. She almost smiled. The human began to move through the hall, nodding politely when addressed, offering brief exchanges. His posture was relaxed but attentive. He did not linger where conversations thickened with ambition. And then, without hesitation or visible internal debate, he altered his path, toward her. She did not stiffen. She refused to stiffen. He approached her table with an ease that bordered on audacity. Up close, his expression held no trace of pity or exaggerated reverence. His eyes met hers directly, not challenging, not submissive, simply present. "Your Highness," he said, inclining his head in a gesture that was almost a bow but not quite theatrical. "May I?" He indicated the empty chair beside her. The nearest conversations faltered. She held his gaze for a measured breath. "You may." He pulled the chair back and sat. No fanfare. No grand declaration, just the quiet scrape of a seat being claimed. Raloon's voice crackled softly in her ear. "Social anomaly detected. The hall's curiosity levels have spiked." She ignored it. The human glanced briefly at the star map beneath the table's surface. "Is that your home system?" "It is." He studied the shifting points of light. "We charted it differently in our early scans. We were wrong." "In what way?" "We assumed it was binary instability. Turns out it was just complexity." She regarded him carefully. Humans often mistake complexity for instability. He smiled faintly. Frequently, we're improving. A server drone approached uncertainly, recalibrating its programming to include the newly occupied seat. The human accepted a glass without inspecting its contents. "If I collapse," he murmured lightly to her, "I trust your medical technology is impressive." "It is," she replied, "but paperwork afterward can be tedious." "That's universal." A subtle ripple of amusement touched her voice. "You risk diplomatic confusion by sitting here. I was told this is the royal table." "It is. And you are royalty." "I am." "Then it seems appropriate." The simplicity of his logic disarmed her more effectively than flattery ever had. Across the hall, a minor noble leaned toward another and whispered too loudly. "Bold, for someone so new to our quadrant." The human's ear twitched slightly. Human ears were far less expressive, but she noticed the movement. He did not turn toward the comment. Instead, he gestured subtly to the ceiling where the twin suns' light filtered through. "Do you ever tire of that view?" The question caught her off guard. "Of the suns?" she asked. "Of watching them from the same vantage point?" She considered. "No, they are never identical twice." He nodded as though that confirmed something he had suspected. "We had only one. People used to argue about whether it revolved around us. And does it? Regrettably not." A quiet laugh escaped her before she could suppress it. Raloon pulsed brightly. Heart rate increased. She muted the channel. Around them, the hall continued its intricate dance of diplomacy, but the space at her table no longer felt cavernous. The chair beside her was occupied, not by obligation or strategic calculation, but by choice. "Your people," she said after a moment, "are known for unpredictability. We prefer creative adaptation." "Is this creative adaptation?" "Sitting down," he shrugged lightly. Seemed inefficient to leave the best seat empty. Her ears angled forward despite herself. "You assume it is the best. I value clear company." The words were not grand. They were not heavy with implication. And yet something within her, long braced against dismissal, shifted. Across the hall, curiosity thickened. A rival delegate finally approached the edge of her table, offering a strained smile. "Ambassador," he addressed the human, "you are aware of the nuances of seating arrangements." The human glanced up calmly. "I was informed there would be chairs." A beat of silence. The rival delegate's expression faltered. She felt warmth flicker in her chest, not embarrassment, not quite pride, something lighter. The convergence had not changed in its structure. The politics still hummed beneath conversation. Alliances still formed in coded phrases. But at her side, a chair had been pulled back, and someone had chosen to sit. The hall did not erupt. It did something far more interesting. It adjusted. Conversations resumed, but not in the same pattern. The invisible lines that had once curved neatly around her table bent inward instead. Curiosity outweighed caution. The fact that a human, young, unentitled, unimpressed by ancestral hierarchies, had taken the empty seat introduced a variable tradition had not rehearsed for. She felt it in the air pressure shifts, in the altered tone of nearby voices. Her ears angled subtly, not in defense now, but in attention. The rival delegate who had questioned the seating remained standing at the edge of the table, clearly torn between offense and diplomacy. "Ambassador," he tried again, smoothing his expression, "royal proximity is not merely about furniture placement." The human glanced at the chair beneath him as though confirming its existence. "It appears stable." A few nearby dignitaries failed to suppress quiet amusement. The rival delegate inhaled. "There are expectations, signals." "I am signaling that I prefer interesting conversation," the human replied mildly. "If that violates protocol, I apologize in advance to the furniture." She lowered her gaze briefly, hiding the warmth rising to her face. It had been a long time since anyone had treated tension as something negotiable rather than sacred. The rival delegate hesitated, recalculating. To protest further would appear insecure. To withdraw would concede the moment. He withdrew. Raloon's voice filtered through her private channel, barely contained delight in its modulation. Historical footnote, confrontation deflected by reference to furniture. "Raloon, I am merely documenting progress. The human leaned slightly closer, not conspiratorial, simply reducing the need to raise his voice. Was that a duel? A mild one, she replied. Our species favors politeness sharpened to a fine edge. I'll try not to bleed on the table. Her laugh this time was not restrained. It slipped free and lingered. A few heads turned, not because she had spoken, but because she had laughed. The evening advanced. Food courses adapted to the metabolic requirements of each delegate. Gravity fields fluctuated gently as species, with differing densities, shifted in their seats. A crystalline ambassador began emitting harmonic tones that translated into a proposal for shared energy research. The Kareth envoy, now firmly grounded, attempted humor of his own and nearly triggered a minor trade dispute before retracting it with visible panic. Through it all, the human remained beside her. He did not dominate conversation. He did not attempt to impress the hall with dramatic speeches. He asked questions, simple ones, direct ones. He listened. And when others tentatively approached the table, drawn by curiosity more than obligation, he did not yield the space as though he had trespassed. He acted as if he belonged. That was the true disruption. At some point, a senior counselor finally approached her directly. "Your Highness," he began carefully, "it is refreshing to see active engagement." She met his gaze steadily. Engagement has always been available. The counselor shifted just slightly. Perception evolves. "Yes," she said, "it does." The human watched the exchange without interference, though she sensed his awareness. He understood more than he pretended to. "Your lineage," the counselor continued, "has long been regarded as formidable." "Formidable," she echoed lightly. "A strength that can be misinterpreted." Strength often is. There was no accusation in her tone, only clarity. The counselor inclined his head. "Perhaps we have allowed caution to masquerade as wisdom." A quiet acknowledgement, not an apology but close enough. When he departed, the human exhaled softly. That felt significant. "It was," she admitted. "Should I have applauded? That would have caused panic. I can restrain myself." She studied him then, truly studied him. He had not come armed with strategy or subtle manipulation. He had come with something far rarer in halls like this, uncomplicated respect. "Why?" she asked quietly. He looked at her. "Why what? Why sit here?" He considered before answering, which she appreciated. "When I entered, I saw a room orbiting itself, everyone calculating trajectories. And then I saw you, not calculating, just steady." He shrugged faintly. "On my world, when something holds steady, we build around it." Her ears tilted forward, catching the sincerity beneath the words. No tremor of ambition, no hidden hunger. Raloon pulsed thoughtfully. Emotional sincerity index, unusually high. She did not mute it this time. As the convergence progressed toward its formal exchange of declarations, the presiding chancellor rose. The hall quieted in layered waves. "Tonight," the chancellor began, "we gather not merely to reaffirm alliances, but to examine the assumptions that underlie them." A pause. Strength has often been mistaken for distance. Tradition has sometimes mistaken itself for necessity. Murmurs shifted. The chancellor's gaze moved, briefly, to her table. "It is not weakness to revise our interpretations. It is growth." The declaration was subtle, but its implication traveled swiftly. Across the hall, several delegates who had carefully avoided her earlier now assessed the optics of continued distance. One by one, a few approached. Not in a swarm, not theatrically, but deliberately. A scholar from a distant moon requested her perspective on shared atmospheric engineering. A trade envoy inquired about collaborative defense technologies. The Kareth representative, finally stable in his chair, offered a respectful nod and an earnest question about cultural exchange programs. She answered each calmly, not guarded, not defensive, simply present. The space around her table filled, not with flattery, but with dialogue. The human remained seated, occasionally contributing, occasionally deflecting attention back to her when appropriate. He did not attempt to translate her strength into something smaller. He allowed it to exist without commentary. At one point, Raloon drifted low enough to project a discrete data stream visible only to her. Engagement metrics had shifted dramatically. Invitations pending. Communication channels opening. Projection update, Raloon whispered. Probability of continued isolation has decreased by 62%. She felt a slow breath move through her chest. Revise further, she murmured. On what basis? Confidence. Raloon brightened. Ah. As the formal portion of the convergence concluded, music, soft, resonant, filled the hall. Gravity stabilized to a neutral baseline. Delegates rose, some drifting toward private negotiation alcoves, others toward the open balconies. She stood as well. For a moment, the human hesitated, as though uncertain whether to follow. She glanced at him. "Walk with me," she said. It was not a command. He rose. They moved toward the eastern balcony where the twin suns had nearly merged at the horizon, their light blending into a molten band of gold and violet. The city below shimmered, alive and intricate. The air was cooler here, quieter. Raloon hovered discreetly at a respectful distance, though she sensed its attentive presence. "They will talk about this," the human said lightly. "They always talk." "Does it trouble you?" She considered the question carefully. "It used to," she said. "I believed their distance meant I was lacking something. And now I see that distance can also mean they lacked courage." He smiled faintly. "We specialize in reckless courage." I noticed. They stood in silence for a few breaths, watching the suns complete their convergence. "You changed the trajectory of the room tonight," he said. "No," she replied gently. "I remained where I have always been." He glanced at her. "I changed," she continued. "I stopped assuming the empty chairs defined me." The words settled between them with quiet weight. Raloon drifted closer, unable to resist commentary. "For the record, Your Highness, I have archived multiple instances of you being objectively formidable. The chairs were statistically irrelevant." She almost rolled her eyes. "Thank you, Raloon. I exist to validate." The human laughed softly. "I like your orb. It is insufferable." "Accurate," Raloon replied. Below them, ships traced luminous paths through the darkening sky. The convergence would ripple outward in data streams and diplomatic transmissions for cycles to come. Policies would shift. Alliances would recalibrate. But here, on the balcony, something far less measurable had settled into place. She turned slightly toward the human. "You will return to your world." "Eventually. And what will you tell them?" He considered. "That royalty is not about volume, it's about gravity." Her ears tilted in curiosity. "Not the kind that pulls you down," he clarified. "The kind that holds things together." She looked back at the merging suns. For years, she had stood beneath them feeling like a solitary figure cast in excessive light. Tonight she felt anchored, not by expectation, not by lineage alone, but by recognition freely given. "I thought," she said slowly, "that I was waiting to be chosen." He watched her. "But I was never unchosen," she continued. "I was simply unseen." A gentle quiet followed. "And now," he asked. She met his gaze, steady and warm. "Now," she said, "I see myself." Raloon's glow softened, almost reverent. Emotional recalibration complete. She laughed softly. "You make it sound mechanical." Growth often is, at its core. Systems adjusting to new data. The suns slipped fully below the horizon, leaving the sky deep and luminous with emerging stars. The hall behind them buzzed with renewed energy, conversations less cautious, alliances less brittle. She straightened, not out of duty but from ease. Tomorrow there would be councils and negotiations. There would still be whispers. Tradition did not dissolve in a single evening, but neither did courage. She glanced once more at the human who had simply sat down. "You disrupted centuries of avoidance," she said lightly. He shrugged. "I needed a seat." She smiled fully, without restraint. Behind them the palace hummed again, not with isolation, with change.